Good morning, everyone, and this is Tostito. So we are back here at the Exploration Place in our biome gallery with our head keeper, Sabrina.
Hi guys!
Who have you got for us today, Sabrina?
We've got our Fire Bellied Toad. This guy is one of our older animal ambassadors here at the museum. And yeah, his name is Tostito, which is kind of strange, but some of them have weird names. He is super cute. Whoops. Let's get him to move up where we can see him good. Can you see his face?
I can. He's very cute.
He's a bumpy little guy. He really blends in with the rocks, and he's definitely one of the ones that when guests come in and they're looking in all the enclosures and observing the animals, even though he's active during the day, which is uncharacteristic of toads, usually they are nocturnal. This guy is diurnal, so he's awake during the daytime. Oftentimes you cannot see him just because of his coloration. He pretty much blends in with the rocks in his enclosure. And that's part of their main survival mechanism, is to be able to just hide out in the open, because where they live, they're surrounded by rocks and moss and things like that. So this species is a darker color, and that's just due to their geographic location. So they're able to blend into their environment with that coloration that they have on their
He
back.
looks like a wet wood chip or a dark rock or something.
He does, yeah, exactly. And these guys, this is the European species, so there are a couple of different subspecies of Fire Bellied Toads. Primarily you'll find the Asian subspecies or the Oriental subspecies in captivity. Those guys are more ornamental looking. They have a very nice, like, bright green spotty pattern on their backs. But they... and they're definitely more common. These guys have the darker pattern on their backs, and these guys are the European species. So this is the European Fire Bellied Toad. So they're a little bit different in terms of care, but not too much. Most of what you would notice would be their appearance is a little bit different.
Now, they call them a fire-bellied toad.
Yeah.
I'm betting that belly must be orange.
Yeah, exactly. So on the Oriental ones, it's more of a bright red color. On these guys, it's more of a light orange. I'll see if I can flip them over. Notice I'm wearing gloves because, again, we don't want to handle any amphibians with their sensitive skin. Whoops. I don't want to make him hop too much. He does not like being out of his enclosure. So let's show.
Oh, yeah, you're getting little flashes of color there.
There
Wow.
we go. Yeah. So that is why they call them the Fire Bellied Toad. It looks like a little fire on their belly. And they'll actually use that as a defense mechanism as well. So if hiding does not work and they aren't blending in as well as they had hoped using that camouflage color on their back, and something is coming after them or something spooks them and they feel threatened, say a predator comes nearby, a bird or something like that, those are one of their primary predators, as well as other amphibians and reptiles also. They'll flip over and they'll show that belly, and that will usually be enough to scare off the predator. Similar to how George would use his tongue, these guys would use that bright color of their belly to be able to ward off predators, because the sudden change in color, when they either raise up their front and they'll show their belly that way, or if they feel extremely threatened and they're really reactive, they'll flip right over and just show their stomach.
Now, Sabrina, I don't get it. This is a toad. Why is he in water?
That's an awesome question to ask, because that's definitely one of the most confusing things about Fire Bellied Toads is most toads that are different from frogs in that they are terrestrial. So they spend almost all of their time on land, with the exception of going into the water to lay eggs, or maybe sometimes to hide from a predator, things like that. Normally toads will be found on the land, and they're not really equipped for life in the water. These guys are an exception to that rule. If you look at his back feet, you'll notice that they are... Whoop, he's going to hop around. You can probably get a good angle of it. His back feet are webbed, which is really uncommon for toads. Most toads have their front feet and their back feet just look like little hands almost, and they have no webbing between. And that is because that's required for walking on land. They're more agile, going over the bushes and through things with those tiny feet than with the webbed back feet. These guys are almost entirely aquatic. They always live near or in the water. So they are semi-terrestrial. This one particularly, European Fire Bellied Toads are a little bit more on the aquatic side, so they spend more time in the water than the Oriental species. But this one specifically, this individual toad, seems to just never want to come out of the water. Like, he has a couple of different points in his enclosure where he can be fully out of the water on the land. He does not really like to do that. I've actually reduced the terrestrial areas in his enclosure and converted those into aquatic areas, because he doesn't seem to use any of his points where he would be able to climb out of the water very often at all.
So is that particular to this individual, or is that a European Fire
For the
Bellied
European
Toad?
Fire Bellied Toads, they do spend more time in the water, and he as an individual spends more time than other European Fire Bellied Toads that I've observed. So we just went ahead and made his enclosure a little bit more suited to him specifically. But most of them will come out on land quite frequently, just not as frequently as the Oriental species.
That's really interesting. It's a testament, I suppose, to having a head keeper on hand, that they get to have their house built the way they like it.
Definitely. We want to make sure that they're happy and that they have everything the way that they would prefer. We try to match their habitats in the wild as best we can with their enclosures, and if we can do a little bit extra, then that's awesome. So yeah, he definitely seems to like being in the water more than on the land. Sometimes he'll sit out the way that you're seeing now. Normally he spends his time in the deeper parts of his enclosure. I have some areas that are deeper and some areas that are more shallow, but he definitely likes the deep water more.
That's really neat. Now, you had told me there was something about him, too, in his locomotion, that he hops rather than jumps.
So that's another thing. Another difference between frogs and toads is their leg structure. So his legs are kind of short and stubby, and they're meant more for hopping short distances and for crawling and climbing. So these guys are actually super, super agile climbers. They can climb over very high points of things and things that you wouldn't expect them to be able to scale over, like flat surfaces and things like that. They'll be able to climb up. And part of that is that their back legs are equipped for climbing, and that their front legs, those little toes that they don't have sticky pads like a tree frog or something like that would have, but they can move and flex those fingers in their fronts so that they can climb over things very well, and they'll stretch their legs way out. Whereas a frog's back legs are more equipped for jumping, so they're definitely longer, and they'll curl them up and spring forward, and that allows them to jump very far distances. These guys can hop along, but more like a terrestrial toad that you'll see, they kind of don't go as far when they jump, just a little bit.
And I imagine they're good swimmers too, right?
He's a great swimmer. He can swim really fast, and when he's in deep water, he's definitely a lot more agile and a lot quicker.
So we have a Pac-Man Frog that acts more like a toad.
Yeah,
and we have a toad that acts more like a frog.
That's one of the things we like to talk about here. So I'll often tell people things about the differences between amphibians and other reptiles, and then we often get into the differences between frogs and toads. So one of the main differences is the fact that usually toads are terrestrial and frogs are aquatic. There are some that break the exception to that rule, and two of our animal ambassadors here are some of those species. So the Pac-Man Frog, they are primarily terrestrial. You will sometimes see them in the water. Our boy Jabba, he'll go into the water if he's about to shed or something like that, or if he's trying to catch fish. Other than that, he spends most of his time on land, buried in the dirt. These guys, however, even though they are a toad, they will spend the majority of their time in or near the water, usually in the water. One of the other differences is that their skin. You'll notice that his skin, even though it's wet like a frog's skin and sort of slimy looking, I guess you could say, it's not actually slimy, but his skin is very, very, very bumpy, which is another thing that's characteristic of toads. They have these nodules all over their skin, which some of these in the top, on the sides near his armpits, actually produce a toxin. So that can happen with frogs as well. Their skin, again, is more smooth and sleek looking, but these guys have very bumpy skin. But the Fire Bellied Toad is toxic, so you would definitely not want to eat it or lick it or anything like that. And that's their primary defense mechanism in the wild, is that they'll make other animals sick if they eat or lick or come in contact with them. So when you are handling them, it's really important to make sure that you wash your hands. Don't get them anywhere near your mouth or eyes or anything like that, because they can make you sick.
One of our members, Ian, is asking if Tostito has gotten out in the exploration place.
Tostito has never gotten out. We did have a Fire Bellied Toad that escaped once before and had to be put back in his enclosure. We also had a Fire Bellied Newt that escaped multiple times and was kind of a Houdini artist. But this guy has never escaped. He seems to be very happy just hanging out in his enclosure, and he's not super racy or climby or anything like that. He's usually fairly docile and relaxed.
Pretty well behaved as a toad goes.
He is, definitely. Fire Bellied Toads are known escape artists, so I'm happy about that.
Now, I know you have another amphibian to share with us today.
I do. So let's get, we'll get Tostito, and we'll move him over a little bit.
Okay.
And we will bring in...
Let's see if I can help a little bit here.
Yeah, I'll scooch him out of the way.
There we go.
Not gonna mind. So this one's going to be a little bit trickier to see. Not only is he much smaller, but he's much more agile, and we'll take that lid right off. And we want to
Okay.
make sure that we're going to be careful not to lose him, because this guy can jump a lot further. Again, this is a frog.
Well, I see leaves. I don't see a frog.
So, I'll take my gloves off just because of that toxic secretion. My hands are clean underneath, but I do not want to get this guy sick by leaving any traces of that on his leaves. And I'm not actually going to touch this one, so. It's usually, oh, there he is.
Where is he?
It's in his favorite spot. I know his favorite spot. It's weird.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
look.
so this is Kermit. Kermit is an American green tree frog, and he is super tiny. They're also known as a California green tree frog, or simply just the green tree frog, because they are one of the most common found in the areas down in the States where you can find these guys. Throughout Florida, I think you can find them all the way up to New Jersey is their furthest north range, so they do have quite a bit of a large geographic area that you can find them in down there.
He is tiny.
Yeah, he's very small. He's a male, so the females do get a little bit bigger than this. But these guys tend to max out at about 2.5 inches full grown, so they don't get super big. And the males are much smaller than the females.
Now, this guy's got a crazy backstory.
Yeah, so this guy took quite an adventure. He is wild caught, but not intentionally. So this guy was living down in some pepperberry trees in California. Probably just minding his own business, hanging out. These guys are arboreal, so you'll find them up high in the trees. They have sticky little toe pads, and they can climb surfaces really well. And again, they can jump really far, so we've really got to watch him when we're doing things with his enclosure. But anyway, he was hanging out in a tree down there, and somebody came and packed up the tree. So he was shipped up with an arrangement of pepperberries and some other foliage that was to be used for floral arrangements here up in Canada. So a florist out in Salmon Valley, a shout out to her, Something Blue Floral Design is her company name. She's really awesome. So she found him when she was unpacking her pepperberries, which means that he took a trip through multiple refrigerated trucks and multiple stops over the course of about a week and a half to be shipped from California all the way up here by accident. So then when she was unpacking and taking apart the pepperberries and cleaning them up and portioning them out for her arrangements, this little guy popped out, and she did not know what to do with him or what he was or what would be the best course of action. So she contacted us, and I expected him actually to be a Pacific green tree frog because those guys are common down there as well, but they do range all the way up here to BC, and we've had those guys before. So based on the description when I was first told about him, that's what I thought he would be, but he got here and he was much smaller than a Pacific green tree frog, and he looks quite a bit different. You'll notice that he's got no black or brown banding on his eyes or spots or anything like that on his back. He's got a white tummy and he's got yellow eyes. So it's probably kind of difficult to see just because he's so small.
Yeah, I'm in about as close as I can get.
Yeah, and he's not he's not super comfortable with like being too close to people, so we don't want to spook him either and get right up in his face or move him around too much.
Yeah.
I'll put some food in his dish. Maybe we can see if he'll eat.
Sure, I'll bring my camera
my
out.
finger.
Oh, look at that. He's on you now,
You
is
be
he?
careful, little guy. Yeah, he jumped down until he's leafed now. So we'll see if he wants to eat.
Yeah, he arrived in, was it January or something too? It was middle of the
Yeah, it was
winter.
the middle of winter, and so these guys, they do sometimes go into brumation depending on where they are found. But thankfully, I think because he was in California, he was in that right spot where he wasn't quite going into brumation, so he wasn't going to hibernate. If he would have been in hibernation, he would have had a less chance of being successful, being brought into captivity so abruptly like that. He also had an injured leg when he came in. I'm going to give him this food. He also had an injured back leg when he came in. One of his legs was, I think that the muscles had just been pulled, and he had some bruising, and the skin didn't look too healthy either, but that healed up really quickly. So he's been doing really well here, actually.
Yeah, I know we were sort of doubtful when you first took him in
When I
as
first
to
brought him in,
whether...
I didn't think he was going to survive. We actually had another frog brought in that came out of a spigot out from a natural spring in Willow River, and he was actually pumped right out through the tap. So this family had found him in one of their giant water cooler jugs that they were filling up, and they pumped up from the natural spring, brought the jugs back to their house, and didn't realize until the next day that there was a frog in one of the jugs. He was a Columbia spotted frog, and he was a little bigger than this guy, but unfortunately because he was already in brumation, that's probably how he got into the spring. He was likely wintering in a deep creek bed or something like that and got washed into the spring and then couldn't get out again. So because he was in that hibernative state, he was very underweight, he was skinny, and he was not in the right sort of physical condition to be so abruptly brought into captivity. But because everything is frozen outside, even the creek beds are frozen over, there was no way to return him to where he had come from. So his best chance was to try and bring him in here and hope that he would adjust if he was left alone enough. Unfortunately, that frog did not make it, probably just because it was too much of a shock to his system to be brought out of brumation and into captivity so abruptly. So that was unfortunate. But fortunately, I did not think that this one was going to make it, and he did. So I'm really happy about that because we've had him for a while now, and he put on a lot of weight. He's doing really well. I have no concerns about him. He eats well, he poops well, he does all the things that he should be doing as a frog. One thing I do feel a little bit sad about for him is that these guys are communal, so hopefully we are going to be able to order some other green tree frogs in the next little while to be able to build a larger enclosure, and they can all live together, and then he'll be much happier. So, but he seems to be doing really well on his own. I think he's happy to not be in a refrigerated truck.
You keep using the term brumation, and I think that means hibernation, am I right?
Yeah, so brumation is basically the reptile or amphibian equivalent of hibernation. The only real difference is that when an animal goes into a hibernative state, they are completely unconscious and they stay that way for a very long time. So for example, bears will eat a whole bunch before they go into hibernation in the fall. You'll see them out there, they're filling up on berries and everything, and they'll actually like block up their system so that they can survive the winter without worrying about starving to death, basically. So they will stay asleep throughout that entire period. They don't wake up, they don't go out to eat, they don't go to the bathroom, they just stay asleep. Whereas with reptiles and amphibians, they do go into a resting state, so they are not moving around as much, they're not eating as much, they're not drinking as much, they often don't do those things at all throughout this time, but they're not unconscious and they're not fully asleep, so they are still able to be able to escape from a predator, and they're not as dormant as a mammal in hibernation. So it's a little bit different, but it serves the same sort of function as hibernation.
So is there any truth to the stories you hear about frogs overwintering by freezing solid?
There definitely are. So frogs will actually, what happens is all of the liquid that's inside of their organs will sort of pull to the outside of their body. So when they freeze solid, the liquids inside their organs don't expand to basically rupture the tissues. So a lot of the moisture content that's throughout their body system will go to the outside, and they will freeze completely solid. The Alaskan wood frog is a really good famous example of that. Those guys, you can find them sometimes where they are basically like a frogsicle, like a little ice cube, frog-shaped ice cube, basically. And then in the springtime, when everything starts to warm up and thaw out, so do they, and they will basically reanimate and come back into their normal sort of state and start walking around again and looking for food. So it's really neat because that's their superpower, is to be able to just freeze completely solid over winter, which obviously most animals would not survive. Actually, one of the stories I'm planning to read soon, we're going to do some pre-taped book readings, so the FGE staff are going to be doing that for kids and posting those videos on the weekend. And one of the ones that I was hoping to read to contribute to that for the story times was a book called Do Frogs Drink Hot Chocolate, where they talk about how the Alaskan wood frog and how other animals survive throughout the winter. So it's really cool to think about all the different types of adaptations that exist throughout different animals, even in one region.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
So my other question for you, since we're talking about amphibians, is can you tell us a little bit about their skin and why it's such an important and delicate part of them?
So amphibians, unlike reptiles, their skin is not waterproof. So reptiles have scales on their skin, and that will protect them from the elements such as heat and cold and sun and things like that, as well as from water. For example, if you were to put a bearded dragon in the water, the liquid cannot permeate their scales. They're waterproof. These guys are complete opposite. So these guys actually drink and breathe through their skin, and it's really important that they have a clean environment to do that in, which is insane. So frogs and toads do not drink through their mouth at all. They don't swallow water intentionally ever. If they need to hydrate, they will soak in the water, and it will be absorbed through osmosis into their skin. So their skin is covered in lots of different pores, and depending on the species, they all have other different sort of specifications that makes them special. Like, for example, the Fire Bellied Toad, as well as like western toads that you'll find here. Those guys secrete a toxin, which is also That is their defense mechanism, so their skin can serve in that way as well. But they're super sensitive to changes in their environment, so part of the reason we don't touch them, for example, is because of that sensitive skin. The salts, the oils, any kind of like soap residue or lotion or anything like that that could possibly be on your hands, even the natural salts and oils that exist on human skin can harm their skin. So they're very sensitive to things like that, which is unfortunate for them in a lot of situations, but is also very advantageous to us to be able to learn from these guys in terms of what's happening in their environment, because they will show you differences in their bodies very quickly, whereas other animals would take a long time to show any kind of symptoms of something being wrong in the watersheds, or so different like pathogens being in their environment, in the soil or the water or the mud or wherever, depending on the species. But you can look to animals for environmental information, and these guys provide a lot of that for us because we're able to watch what they're doing and how they're growing. They will show adverse effects from chemical pollution and other pathogens and things like that very quickly. So they go as far as to like mutate and grow new limbs and stuff like that. So it's really cool to be able to watch them, and also their life cycles go so quickly that every year there's another generation, and there's so many changes in each generation if there is an environmental influence that you are trying to look at to see what is happening in the area where they're from. So they're definitely really, really interesting in their own sense of what they do and how they act and where they are and all that stuff, but they can also tell us a lot about the world around them as well, so that's really cool.
That is really cool. These guys are the proverbial canary in the coal mine.
Definitely, yeah. They're used in a lot of different scientific research for everything to do with the environment because they are so sensitive and because they're so plentiful. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of different species of amphibian, including frogs and toads, all over the world. So no matter where you are, you can look to them as sort of an indicator or a clue as to what is going on in the environment.
That's the word I was looking for. Indicator species. That's what they call them. There we go.
And they show true, so you don't have to worry about different things that can impact other animals, for example, where predatory animals, for example, will eat prey items that have been tainted from one source or another. But because these guys are fairly stationary in the sense that they're found in one sort of particular environment most of the time, you can more closely watch what is going on in that environment when you observe these guys. So.
That's really neat. And you did tell me we're planning to do tadpoles this year, are we not?
Yeah, I'm hoping that. So we used to have a western toad here. She was pretty famous. We had her for years. Her name was Mama Cass, and the kids loved her. She was always ready to come out and eat. That was her favorite thing to do, was eat. And the kids loved watching that. And she was just super agreeable, and western toads are one of the most common species that you'll find here. And they're fairly infamous for being the Canadian toad. You can find them throughout most terrestrial areas in Western Canada as well as towards the east. And the whole life cycle of those guys is super interesting too. Just watching them go from being an egg to turning into a tadpole and then growing into a frog, which is another really neat thing that I like to be able to explain during programs like Amazing Amphibians and Radical Reptiles is one of our most popular programs, and that is just explaining the differences between reptiles like snakes and lizards and things like that and amphibians. So the metamorphic process is the main difference between those animals. They start out as one thing, a tadpole, which is almost like a fish, and they grow into something completely different. So that's a really cool process to be able to watch, and we're hoping to be able to get some western toad tadpoles and grow them out in the enclosure where we used to house our old western toad calves. And then hopefully we'll just re-release the froglets or toadlets once they are of a decent size and able to eat on their own. We'll let them go back where we had found the eggs and probably keep one here as an ambassador as well. So we're excited about that.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I really appreciate you taking the time again today to share all of your knowledge with us. If people have questions for you, how can they find you?
You guys can go ahead and contact us on Facebook. You can leave comments on the videos, even if it's another video you've watched before, or if there's something you wanted to know about Tostito or about Kermit the Frog, you guys can go ahead and ask them there, and I'll do my best to answer your questions as soon as I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sabrina. And we will be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock with another edition of What Does Chad Have?
Yay!
And I think tomorrow we're going to be talking about Ben Ginter. So thanks very much for tuning in, everybody. I'll leave you with a shot of Tostito as we're closing off for the day. Enjoy the rest of your day.